There is a kind of silence that only exists before violence. It is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of held breath, of eyes scanning the dark horizon, of hands gripping wood and iron so tightly that the knuckles lose their color. This is where our story begins. Not in the courts of emperors, not in the gilded halls of shoguns, but on the edge of a cliff, on a small island battered by cold wind and colder rain, where a single man holds a torch against the dark and watches the sea. He is not a samurai. He has no horse, no ancestral sword, no family crest sewn into lacquered armor. His name has been forgotten by history. He is a farmer. He is a soldier. He is both at once, and he is afraid. Far below him, past the white foam breaking against black rocks, past the churning grey water that separates this island from the mainland of danger, he sees lights. Small at first, then more, then dozens. Lanterns swaying in the hulls and masts of ships that do not belong to his people, moving steadily, deliberately, toward the shore he has sworn to protect with nothing but a spear of sharpened bamboo and the desperate knowledge that if he fails, everything ends. This is the world we are about to enter. The world of medieval Japan, where islands were not paradise but fortresses, where rice fields were not pastoral beauty but survival, where every harvest was a battle won and every invasion was a harvest threatened. A world where the line between farmer and warrior was not a line at all, but a blur of sweat and mud and blood and sacrifice, written into the bodies of ordinary people who had no choice but to be extraordinary. To understand this world, you have to understand the land itself. Japan is not a country built for comfort. Nearly 70% of its terrain is mountainous, steep and unforgiving, covered in dense forest that resists the plow and swallows roads whole. The remaining land, the flatlands near rivers and coasts, was precious beyond measure. Every square meter of flat earth capable of growing rice was fought over, irrigated, terraced, shaped by human hands over generations into something that could sustain life. The islands were no different. On Tsushima, on Iki, on the dozens of smaller islands scattered across the Seto Inland Sea and the waters of Kyushu, communities of farmers and fishermen built their entire existence around two realities that seem opposite but were completely intertwined, the sea and the soil. The sea gave them fish, trade routes, and sometimes, enemies. The soil gave them rice, and rice was everything. Rice was not just food. Rice was currency. Rice was power. The system of taxation that held medieval Japan together was measured in koku, units of rice, and a clan's political power was literally calculated by how many koku their territory could produce each year. The farmers who grew that rice, who shaped terraces into mountainsides with their bare hands and flooded fields with water carried through channels of split bamboo, these people were the foundation of everything. And yet they received the least. What they planted, much of it was taken. The samurai class, the warrior aristocracy who controlled the land, collected their portion first. What remained was divided among the farmers themselves, and what remained after that was survival. Millet instead of white rice, barley and radish, thin soups made from whatever could be found in a lean winter. The body adapted because it had to. The spirit adapted because there was no alternative. Watch a man push a wooden plow through waterlogged soil and you will understand something that no history book can fully explain. The resistance of the earth is not metaphorical. It is physical. You feel it in your arms, in your lower back, in the burning muscles of your legs as you lean your entire body weight into a tool that was designed centuries before you were born and will outlast you by centuries more. The mud does not care about your ambitions. The soil does not reward noble intention. It rewards only work. Close your eyes and imagine it. The morning fog still sitting low over the paddy fields, the water cold enough to numb the feet within minutes of wading in, the sound of other farmers working nearby, not speaking, just the rhythmic splash and drag of labor, and above everything else, the smell. Rich, dark, organic earth turning over. Decomposed plant matter. Standing water beginning to warm in the early sun. It is not a romantic smell. It is not a perfume. It is the smell of the raw material of civilization. The terraces that these farming communities carved into hillsides were feats of engineering that required not one generation but many. A grandfather would begin the excavation, moving stone and soil by hand, by basket, by determination alone, and his grandson would see the terrace fully functional. These were not projects. They were inheritances. Obligations passed down like surnames and debts. You received the work half done. You added your own years to it, and you handed it forward, more complete but never finished. Water was the central problem and the central miracle. Without a reliable way to flood the rice paddies at the right time and drain them at another, the entire system collapsed. So the communities built channels of bamboo and clay-lined ditches that pulled water from streams and rivers high in the hills and walked it down, slowly, patiently, to field hundreds of meters below. Wooden water wheels turned in the current, lifting water into higher channels, an engineering solution so elegant that it would survive for centuries with almost no modification. When you see these channels running through a field at golden hour, when the late afternoon light catches the moving water and turns it to liquid copper, it is easy to forget the labor. The hands that shaped the bamboo, the weeks of trial and error, the floods that destroyed and the droughts that withered, the constant negotiation between the human will and the indifferent laws of physics and weather. Beauty, in this world, was never free. It was always the residue of suffering made into something that could sustain life one more season. The house at the center of the farming village was called a Minka, a dwelling of the people, and it was as honest a structure as any ever built by human hands. No decoration for its own sake. No material that was not earned and necessary. The frame was heavy timber, mortised and tenoned together without metal fasteners, because metal was rare and expensive and wood was what the forests gave freely to those who knew how to take it without destroying the source. The roof was deep and overhanging, thick with bundled straw or rushes, sloped steeply to shed the enormous rainfall that characterized Japanese island life. The inside was dim even on bright days, the walls absorbing light rather than reflecting it, and at the center of the single large room was the irori, the hearth, the literal heart of the home. The irori was not a fireplace in the European sense. It was a square pit cut directly into the earthen floor, filled with ashen glowing coals, over which hung a hook from the ceiling beam to suspend a pot. The fire burned almost continuously through the cold months, and the smoke it produced rose freely through the interior of the house, up through the thatched roof, coating every beam with a layer of dark resin that preserved the wood against insects and rot. The house was cured by its own fire, over years and decades, growing stronger and darker with every winter. Around the irori, a family would gather in the evening, not in comfort exactly, but in proximity to warmth, in the shared radius of light against darkness. A pot of soup would be simmering, thin broth, slices of daikon radish, perhaps a few pieces of salted fish if the catch had been good, a small portion of grain thickening the bottom. Faces illuminated only by the orange pulse of the coals, eyes reflecting fire, children falling asleep against their parents with the particular heaviness of bodies that have worked since before sunrise. This was their peace. This small, smoke-filled circle of warmth and shared hunger. This was what they were defending when they picked up their spears and walked toward the shore. The Ashigaru, the foot soldier of medieval Japan, was the most honest contradiction that feudal society ever produced. The word itself means light feet, swift, unencumbered by the weight of armor and ancestry that slowed the mounted samurai. But in truth, the Ashigaru was anything but light. He carried the weight of two worlds, the world of the field and the world of the battlefield, and he was never fully at rest in either. In the planting season, he was a farmer. His hands were in the mud, his back was bent toward the earth. His daily calculations were about rain and irrigation and seed quality and the slow arithmetic of survival. In the harvest season, if the clan lord called, he was a soldier. The spear he carried was not forged by a master craftsman. It was often a simple pole of hardened wood with a sharpened point of whatever iron could be sourced, functional, unlovely, honest in the same way that everything in his life was honest. His armor, if he had any at all, was improvised. Layers of cloth hardened with lacquer, strips of leather, sometimes plates of iron, but rarely, because iron was precious and the Ashigaru was, to the arithmetic of the lord above him, replaceable. He was not supposed to think about this. He was supposed to think about loyalty, about the honor of his community, about the faces of the children sleeping around the irori who would have no fire to sleep beside if the enemy reached the village. And so he fought. Not with the formal discipline of the samurai tradition, not with the practiced forms of swordsmanship refined over a lifetime, but with the ferocious, desperate, practical violence of someone who has too much to lose. When a line of Ashigaru charged across a flooded rice field, their feet throwing up curtains of brown water, their voices raised in something between a battle cry and pure animal fear, they were not performing war. They were surviving it. Let us go back to the cliff, to the man with the torch. He has sent a runner inland. A boy, perhaps 12, fleet and terrified, carrying the message that the lights on the water are real and getting closer. In the village below, the men who are sleeping will be woken. Women will hide the rice stores and the children and the iron tools that represent years of accumulated trade and effort. The older men, those who have survived a previous raid or a previous season of war, will move to designated positions along the beach and the paths that lead up from it, clutching weapons that are simultaneously farming tools and killing instruments. A sharpened bamboo stake driven into the sand at the water's edge is not different from the bamboo used to carry water to the rice field. It serves different water now. It means to stop a different kind of flooding. The wall they build in hours of desperate night labor is crude, functional, built from materials that were meant for other purposes and repurposed by necessity. It will not stop a determined force of professional soldiers, but it will slow them, and sometimes slowing is enough. The waves come in rhythmically, indifferent to the drama playing out above the waterline. The foam pushes around the bases of the sharpened stakes, retreats, returns. The sea has been doing this for 10,000 years and will continue doing it long after every person on this beach, attacker and defender alike, is dust and silence. When the first boats ground against the sand, when the first silhouettes come over the rail and into the shallows, the man with the torch drops it into the prepared pile of wood and rushes back down from the cliff. The signal fire rises behind him, a column of flame visible across the water, speaking to other islands, to allied clans, to anyone who might see it and understand that a place is in need of help it may not survive long enough to receive. This is not a glorious moment. There are no drums. There is no music designed to make this feel epic. There is only the sound of the sea and the fire and the voices of frightened people who chose to stay and fight instead of flee, because the land beneath their feet is not just land. It is terraced hillsides shaped by their grandparents' hands. It is bamboo channels that carry water to fields they planted with their own children beside them. It is the aruri that is still warm, the pot still hanging over coals, the soup still simmering for a morning meal that may or may not be eaten. The invasions of the Mongol fleets in 1274 and 1281 left a mark on the Japanese imagination that shaped everything that came after. The islands of Tsushima and Iki bore the full force of the first wave. Communities of samurai and farmers and fishermen standing against a military machine of a size they had never seen and could not have prepared for in any meaningful way. The defenders of Tsushima, outnumbered and outgunned, fought in the way that people fight when retreat is impossible, not because they were brave in any abstract sense, but because bravery and the absence of any viable alternative can look identical from the outside. The island's defenders knew that behind them was everything they had. There was nowhere to fall back to that was worth falling back to. The walls that were built after the first invasion, long stone barriers called Genko Barua running along the coastlines of Kyushu, were a physical monument to the lesson learned. You do not wait for the enemy to reach the village. You stop them at the water. You put stone between their ambition and your children. You build the wall with the same hands that build the terrace and dig the irrigation channel. Because in this world, the hand that grows the food and the hand that defends the food are the same hand. There is a philosophy in Japan, old and subtle and not always easy to translate, called Wabi-Sabi. It is the acceptance and appreciation of impermanence and imperfection. The cracked tea bowl that has been repaired with gold, the moss growing on an old stone, the grain of aged wood, the rust on iron that has been used and used and used. In the medieval village, Wabi-Sabi was not a philosophy anyone consciously practiced. It was simply the visual reality of daily life. Nothing was new. Nothing gleamed. The iron of the farm tools was dark with oxidation and use. The wood of the house had been darkened by decades of smoke. The clothing of the farmers was rough linen, washed until it softened, patched and repatched until the original fabric was more memory than material. The straw rain capes, the mino, that the farmers wore in wet weather looked almost like living things, like a person half transformed into a haystack, shedding water from 1,000 overlapping blades of straw. In the end, the history of medieval Japan was not written only in the ink of scholars or the blood of generals. It was written in the rhythmic splash of water through bamboo pipes and the calloused hands that refused to let go of the plow. The warrior and the farmer were never two different people. They were the same soul, defending the same soil. And as the sun sets over the terraced hills, we realize that the silence before the violence has been replaced by a different kind of silence, the quiet, enduring strength of a land that remembers everything, yet continues to grow. For in this world, the greatest victory was never the battle won. It was the harvest that followed.